Hi everybody, this is Beth from Quilts and Lace at home today and trying to finish up a little project that we've been working on, the quilted sewing mat that Joanne Banco created. And so I just thought I would show putting the binding on. Now I've already have it about completed on my sewing mat. So I've taken a little scrap and I'm going to show how you just go around the corners for the binding. And then I'll show you how to use the Cut Right Bind Up tool, which I've shown in the past, but thought it would be good to show it one more time so that you guys can just see how easy it is. So this is Beth from Quilts and Lace. Thank you for joining me today. Hey Marilyn, hey Connie, great to have you guys with me. I hope not to make you dizzy today, but like I said, the first thing that I'm going to show is doing the binding just right on a little quilted square is what I have, and then I'll flip the camera and hopefully you guys won't get dizzy, and I'll show you my mat and using the Cut Right tool. All right, so again, I have to do this on selfie mode, so it looks like I have a truly unique left-handed machine, but I do not. It is just a regular sewing machine in selfie view. All right, so just gonna angle that down a little bit. There we go. All right, so this is my little quilted piece of material. Maybe I wanted to make a mug rug out of it or something. I've already started to go around with the binding. I try to start in a either at a side point, just offset a little bit, or at the bottom. I try to make my where my binding is going to meet up in a non-noticeable spot. So I have started at the bottom, or what I'm going to call the bottom on this over here. I've already gone around two corners and I'm about to go to this one here. I have my walking foot on. I thought I've been doing it for doing the quilting, so it'll be great for binding also. So I do have that on. Today I'm on the Solaris, the Baby Lock Solaris machine, and all I'm using is a straight stitch. I just have my needle in the center position, and then what I've done with my guidelines, and I don't know if you can see those two green lines. They're right here. One I've set where my needle is at, and one I have set a 1/4 inch away from my needle. I'm about to come upon the corner, and you just put your raw edges of the binding lined up with the raw edges of your top material. This top material does extend it a little bit beyond, but I do like to have a 1/4 inch beyond the top so that when I bring my binding around, it's got a little batting underneath it. So let me just continue stitching, and I'm going to stitch until I get a 1/4 inch away from that top piece. So let me go ahead and just start sewing, and I'm just watching my lines, and I'm coming up, and I just kind of guess. I actually don't have to be too precise. I'm then going to lift my needle up, my presser foot up. I pull it away from the needle, and then I flip up my binding so that the raw edge of my top material is lined up with the raw edge and makes a nice straight edge with my binding. So I flip that back at a 45-degree angle, and then I flip again and make a little fold right on the edge that I was just on. And I'm hoping that camera's getting close enough. I can get maybe a tad closer. There we go. So again, I've stitched until a 1/4 inch. I've flipped it up so that I've got this little angle here. I then flip it back down so that my raw edges line up and they're nice and straight. I'm going to take it back to the machine and just start stitching a 1/4 inch away from that raw edge. So I don't clip my threads or anything when I turn my corner. I just kind of tuck them to the back, and I just want to start my needle on the edge of the fabric there. So, and my green line is right on the raw edge. And now I'm going to sew down this way. So let me go ahead and get to the end. And then we'll flip one more time, and then I am going to bring this over to my cutting table so that you can see how to use the Cut Right tool. Let me just make sure I've got that lined up. So I'm getting until I'm about 1/4 inch away from my edge. That looks pretty good. Needle up, presser foot up, pull my material out, flip it back so that my binding is a straight line with the edge of my fabric, that is the top. I then flip this back again so that it's heading in the right direction. I've got a fold right here, and I make sure to line up my raw edge, tuck the threads back underneath the foot, make sure to get that tail out of the way, and now I'm going to continue on this side. Now I'm not going to sew very far because this is just a tiny little square. And by the way, the reason that I am doing this type of corner on it is so that when I flip it and come to the back, I'll have a nice mitered corner on both the front side and the back side. Okay? Now, I do want to have a tail on each end. I need just a little bit of wiggle room in order to cut it. And I want an opening here so that I'm not struggling too hard. So I'm just going to stitch just a little bit more. And I'm going to go ahead and cut. And now I'm going to bring this over to my cutting table, and I am going to create a binding that's going to meet perfectly there. So actually, before I head to the table, I can go ahead and do this step. So what you want to do, make sure to leave enough of a tail on each side, and you just have this flat along the edge, just like you were going to sew it on. And then you're going to put a really nice crease where the bindings meet. So I just fold them back at a meeting point, and I make a nice crease. If I could take it to the iron, that would be even better. So now I've got where my binding on each side is going to meet. I've got my folded edge that has a nice crease, and I've got this edge here that I've just created. Alrighty, so like I said, I hope you're not going to get dizzy. I am going to turn my camera around to my workspace here. There we go. And there's my sewing mat that I'm working on. So I'll show that in a minute. But let me bring this over here. So I'm going to push this aside just for a moment. So you're going to need a little Frixion pen, and then this is that Cut Right bind up tool that I really, really like. And again, sorry that this is a selfie because you will be seeing it kind of upside down. So when you see I use left, it's going to be right on the camera, but I hope that it will be clear enough so that you can see what I'm doing. All right, so here's the little project I just completed with my 2 little tails. This is my right side, and this is my left side. So opposite for you guys, so sorry. I am going to take this piece right here, and I'm going to open my binding up. I need to have a cutting mat because I'm going to be cutting this tail. I'm going to take my marker, and just so hopefully you guys can see it really well, I am marking on that crease that I just folded, and I am marking on that original fold when you put your binding in half and press it wrong sides together. Alrighty, I am going to do the same on this side. So I'm going to take this side, open it up, and let me just make sure I've got the right crease there. Alrighty, and I'm going to mark it and mark it. Okay, and I'm just going to put that one back. Just make sure I've got the right places. Okay, so I don't need my marker anymore. I'm now going to take my Cut Right tool, and because this is my right side, I am going to make sure that I can read the R that it reads an R to me and is not upside down or backwards. So I'm going to put that binding again on the cutting mat. I'm going to take the Cut-Right tool, and there are crosshairs right on the edge of this diagonal cut right here, or the edge of the ruler. I'm going to line those crosshairs up with those lines that I drew on my binding. Now, since it's such a short cut, I'm actually going to be able to use my cutter, and I'm just going to cut right along that edge. So I'll try to get my hand out of the way for you. Okay, so I have cut that off, and that is the excess tail that I don't need. Now, on the top of this ruler, there is a blunt cut right here. And I just slide the ruler down, still keeping that diagonal edge of the ruler flush with the cut that I just made. And I'm going to cut that little dog ear off. So I'm going to cut him off. Okay, so we've cut him off. All right, so that's my right side ready to go and complete. I'm now going to take my left side. I'm going to open this one up. Make sure that I'm on a good cutting surface. I am now going to turn my tool so that I can read the letter L and have that right side up, which is right here. I'm going to take those same crosshairs that are now going in the other direction, and I'm going to line it up. And let me just make sure I've got my creases right, because I had two. That's right. And now what I'm going to do is put those crosshairs on the left-hand side, line them up there, and I am going to cut right on that diagonal line. So let me just make sure I've got that correct. And cut right on that line. And now I'm going to slide my ruler up along that diagonal line, keeping it flush, that cut that I just made with that line, and I'm going to cut the little dog ear off on this side. Okay, now the reason that I like to make sure to do that is when I put these two pieces together, they are going to line up perfectly. So now I've got these two diagonal cuts. I am going to put right sides together. I am going to line up that little dog ear flat edge that I created up on this side. I'm going to match my diagonal cuts, and where I cut the little dog ear off on this side is going to be flush with the bottom also. Then I'm going to take a couple pins. I'm going to pin this one here, and I'm just pinning right perpendicular to where I'm going to sew. So I usually just use a couple, but you can see if you give yourself a little more wiggle room here, it's easier to take it to the sewing machine and get that underneath the presser foot of the sewing machine. And then you're going to sew a 1/4 inch. Now I'll show you that step with my mat that I completed here. So here is where my binding met on this one. I had lined up my freshly cut lines where I had knocked off that little dog ear, lined it up with that, and where I chipped off the little dog ear on this side, I lined it up, and I sewed a 1/4 inch seam. I then pressed this open on the inside to make it not bulky, and there is my original fold, and it fits perfect. My final step is going to be to continue to sew. I'll take it back to the sewing machine. This is where I've stopped sewing on this side, and this is where I stopped sewing on this side. I'll take it to my sewing machine, and I'll continue to do my 1/4 inch seam until I meet up with the other side. Then the binding will be attached all the way around. I've already taken this to my sewing machine because after I attach my binding everywhere, I do like to take it to my iron and I press the binding out. By pressing this, when I am ready to stitch on the back line here, so I'm on the back, I'm going to bring my binding around to the back side. I can line up that fold of that fabric. Hopefully you see it. I've got pink on pink. I line up the fold of the fabric with that stitch line that I did, so that I cover that up and nobody's going to see that stitch line on the back side. So we just fold that like that. And then I do hand sewing to do it. If you wanted to, you could have sewn the back side, brought it around to the front, and then you could use your sewing machine so that you would get a nice straight edge on the visible side. Okay, now I'll just show you what I got here. So the other day, Joanne gave us great instructions for stitching this in the embroidery machine. So I stitched that out in the Stellaire. And what I did is I did sew a piece of fabric right sides together, left a little opening to turn it right sides out. And instead of just attaching it all the way on this pocket, what I did is I also created a second pocket with it. So I've labeled that one needles, so I'm thinking that's where I can put my little packet of needles. I like to keep the one that I have on the sewing machine nearby, so I'll keep it tucked in there so I know what I have on my machine. And then there's another pocket behind it. I finished doing all the decorative stitches, so I used the walking foot on all of these. So I did quite a variety of decorative stitches. I finished doing the applique around by just doing a satin stitch around these two little squares, and then some more decorative stitches there. So if you can see, this is how it's going to be. So these are my little pockets, and this will hang off the edge of my table, and my little sewing machine will go right here. If you can see on the back side, I did finally finish the quilting. So again, I used my walking foot, and I used the grid that's on the Solaris and on the Luminaire XP2, and it turned out pretty well. And I am not a quilter, so looks pretty good. And it looks really good on this side because you can barely see it. So anyway, all I've got to do is the hand stitching. And if Jen is on, I might ask her to do that for me. But won't that be a cute little mat? All right, guys. That's all I have for you today. And I'll bend down here. Thank you for joining me. And I hope you guys have a great Sunday afternoon. Because I was not able to see the comments, I will look at them a little bit later. All right, guys. Thank you for joining me on this extended project that we did, and have a great Sunday afternoon. Bye, guys.